In this episode of Nitro Nights, we talk about which sim has the best force feedback. We also hear the top 5 of sims and how they feel from gamer muscle. And we talk to Moritz Loehner about his impression. What's the difference in force feedback between a real car and a simulator one? What makes driving in a sim feel good and real? Is it the graphics or the sound? All of that is important, but not what we will be talking about today. Instead, we will have a look at the feeling behind the wheel. And that means we're talking about everything regarding force feedback. I know which one I prefer when it comes to the Sims and force feedback, but who cares about my opinion? Instead, we'll be talking about it with two people who spend enough time in Sims and the real-world cars to really know their stuff. We'll have Moritz Loehner and Gamer Muscle with us, and they got the right answers. Which one really has the best force feedback? Already a small spoiler for later on, Gamer Muscle will even do a blind test. Which sim really has the best force feedback? So stay tuned for that. Let me also remind you guys about obviously liking this video and subscribing to our channel. That will really help, and we appreciate that. Made it over to the couch, and as you can see, I'm not on my own because we got James, or also known as Gamer Muscle, already here. James, great to have you on the show.
Hiya.
That was a good start.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, it seems like you know how to do videos.
I am.
Did you ever do that?
I'm a video pro, yes.
That's a good start. Obviously, just to get that clear, you are a content creator. Just for the people who don't know you, there might be a few, like maybe they all just watched Super GT, never saw you.
Yeah, there's a few lonely people out there that accidentally stumbled upon Gamer Muscle videos and regretted it pretty quickly, yes.
No, it's fine. And obviously, you know what we invite you for. First of all, you look great on camera. That's the first real reason, right? And the second is to talk about a very important thing for us sim racers, right? And that is the actual feeling of cars and force feedback.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Chemistry is there, James. What should go wrong?
You caught me off guard with the start. Though I was like, oh, we're actually going now.
This is the real world.
Okay, yeah. No, I wasn't ready then.
That's fine. We get there. Don't worry. So let me ask first. What was the first sim or racing title in general for you where you thought like, hey, this feels great? Because we obviously probably all started with gamepads at one point or even keyboard racing or Need for Speed, whatever. But what was the start for you where you thought like, okay, this feels like a car now?
So the first decent driving sim with a good force feedback, I'd say is Live for Speed was the first one that really got me impressed by force feedback and got me obsessed with force feedback, I think.
Still love it nowadays. Like I played it on the channel a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's still great.
Also, it works. It's a really nice thing with it is it works with every steering wheel on the market really well. Yep. So you don't need a high-end wheel. You plug it in and it's the same for everyone. So
Live for Speed, I think a lot of people share that opinion, but there was obviously GTR, GTR2, right? GP Legends at that time. But what is force feedback then to start with, right? We want to make sure that we can pick up each and every one of you. So if you're not a pro in the force feedback segment yet, don't worry, we'll get that done today. So give me a description of what is force feedback and why it's so important.
So force feedback, where do you start with force feedback? This is like,
that's why I gave it to you as well.
Okay, let me just, right, how long have we got? That'll be about 4 hours. So where do we start with force feedback? How simple do we go? Or how complicated do we go with this?
Maybe we should quickly start with the difference, right? Because we talked about that before starting the show, right?
Yeah.
So there was force feedback in the old days, which was basically just an effect getting triggered, right? So if I drive with a car over a curb, it triggers the curb effect and this wheel starts shaking, right? That were the good old days, I would say. And nowadays, all of that is based on the physics model of basically, depending on the game, or depending on the sim, every single screw and whatever makes a suspension, and that then translate to an effect on the steering wheel, right?
Yeah.
So why is it so important for drivers?
Well, so obviously if you're playing, if you're driving a real car, you can feel what's happening around you. That's the whole joy of driving. Well, one of the biggest joys of driving is that you feel what's going on and you're using that feeling to then understand the physics to get the most out of the vehicle. And the problem with a driving simulator, you're sat there, you're not moving, you're not feeling anything. So the real amazing thing with force feedback is it's one way to give the player of the game the ability to feel what the car's doing. So good force feedback lets you feel that through the steering wheel and tells you what's going on. And that's the sort of the modern force feedback that we have now, as opposed to the simple rumble force feedback of days past.
Yeah, that's a long time ago by now. But so is that what you're looking for in force feedback in general? Or just giving, is there no other layer to it other than giving you a feel of what the chassis is doing so you can position the car correctly?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple components to force feedback. You have the immersive quality of force feedback. So I think that's where you do have the rumble comes into effect. You can feel the road texture, suspension travel. That's obviously important. But then, yeah, I think the most important part of force feedback is that conveyance of how much grip you have with the tyres and the rotation of the car, but also the grip of the tyres and how much grip you've got to work with. So you can use the force feedback to then get the most out of the car.
Which is a bit contrary. I love that, right? Because we know that there was a time in competitive sim racing where the quickest guys were the ones turning force feedback off.
Yeah.
Because then you could go over the rumble strips or a curb without feeling anything. So it's just about positioning your steering wheel. What's your opinion on that? Because I think it's still around. I'm sure it's still around.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I think one of the problems that driving simulators have is they're not as dynamic as real driving. It's not as variable. So as a result, because everything's always the same, it really benefits what I would call, and a lot of people describe as guitar hero driving. So if you're getting to an esport level where you're doing such tight, fast laps, well, you're not feeling the car on the fly and working it out. You've memorized what the fastest thing is. You've memorized the inputs on the brake and the accelerator. You've memorized the steering angle. And any deviation from that is going to be slower. So for them, you don't really need that force feedback because you're not going to be thrown in the kind of situation where you're catching it. You're not going to be driving like Michael Schumacher balancing on the limit. So, yeah, for esports, you don't necessarily need that force feedback or use it. But if you're someone that's just jumping into a game and you've not put in thousands of hours of hot lap practice and you just want to get in and drive and feel it, then I think that's where it's really, really useful. And I think as simulators do get more dynamic, that will negate that sort of guitar hero memorized input. So if you've got a track that's got a bit of damp on it and it's going dry, well, right, you're not going to be able to use the pre-rehearsed thing. You're going to have to actually feel out the grip and use the force feedback to then get the most out of it, and that'll give you a competitive edge against someone that's maybe got the force feedback turned off. So, yeah, it gets very complicated very quickly.
We knew that, right? We knew that will happen. So do you think ACC basically simulates what you would really feel in a steering wheel, but you miss all the additional input that you would normally have on a real car on the chassis?
Yeah, exactly.
So ACC would basically then, with your argument, be realistic in terms of force feedback, but it's not what you like because you're missing the input.
Yeah, it could be the most realistic force feedback. Okay. But what's the point in that if you're in a sim rig and you can't feel what the car's doing?
Okay.
And so, as we said off camera as well, like go-karts often don't have, especially rental go-karts, very heavy, very slow, don't have that much force feedback information through the steering wheel. You're driving through what you feel through your bottom, and you can feel the tyre, you can feel the G loading. So you could get you could have a simulator with no force feedback at all in the simulator, get a direct drive wheel, turn the dampening on 80%, run it at 15 Newton meters, and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. You've got top-notch realistic force feedback, but you can't feel what the cart's doing. Okay. So I think that's the problem is driving simulators are fundamentally abstract from reality. So you have to bridge the gap of what's missing there, I think. And that's what I look for in force feedback. It should be optional. You should have the realistic force feedback, but the option to make it more.
Maybe we should quickly touch on that just so that everyone gets it, just in case. We might have someone that's not so keen on all the force feedback discussions that we have for years in sim racing, right? So when we talk about realistic force feedback, it's about the things you would feel in a real car only on the steering wheel, which is not as much as we get in the most sims, right? Because you feel a bit when the front tires are sliding, when you're basically overdriving the tires, right? You feel the curbs, that's a given in steering wheels. Depending on the car, rear-wheel drive, you might feel it if it slips away because the steering gets light and everything. Yeah. But there's a lot of input in sim titles that we're used to that wouldn't be as pronounced, I would say, in a real steering wheel, just because you would feel it elsewhere instead, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously that already gives us in two different directions, right? So we have it now as like ACC might be the most realistic one, but where you feel the most of the car for you, it will be AC. right? So what is it then? I mean, there are other super popular titles out there. What's with iRacing, for example? What's missing in iRacing in your opinion then?
Well, so with iRacing, what's fascinating is a lot of people use an additional application called IRFFB to add in a rotational seat of the pants feel, which lets you feel as the back of the car comes out through a corner. It lets you feel that through the force feedback. The force feedback will get lighter or stronger depending on how much rotation there is. Without IRFFB, with some cars or lots of cars in iRacing, you might not feel anything at all. So that's a good example of having to use a separate program that dramatically changed it to let you feel what's going on.
Steve Myers will already look up your email now to let you know that he's not happy about this answer.
But in fairness to iRacing, the more recent content they've done is actually a lot more communicative, even if you don't use additional programs, and it does convey more of that rotation and more tyre grip feel, especially the new F4 car, for example, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Well,
and yeah,
which we have is a massive undertaking, right? So because to get the right feel of steering wheel, we talk about the tire physics that are part of that, the suspension physics that are part of that, body rigidity and roll, like the entire chassis flex basically that gets transported into the steering wheel as well. So that's a lot of factors for a developer to actually get it right.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about the super simple stuff. If we say, oh, we're not happy with a specific sim, it's not because these developers are lazy. It's just because there's so many different ways of doing it, right? We said already the old way of doing it was obviously a car was nothing more than a box with four wheels. But it was just effects are getting triggered whenever you do X, Y, Z within a title. Yeah. And nowadays it's so much better. But you said on iRacing, so the new content helped out there a bit, making it feel better. AC is nowadays an old title compared to what we have on the market with ACC, with AMS2, and all the other titles. And there will be even more. It's a great time for sim races, I would say. But what could be the next step then for force feedback to really get us onto a new level where we all agree, like, oh wow, that's the newest generation?
Yeah, so I think the direction that force feedback really has to go in to make everyone happy would be you need the choice there so that the player can choose to have realistic, literal force feedback, i.e. you might not actually feel anything of use through the steering wheel to help you drive the car, because that's realistic. That could be a choice. Or you could choose to have additional unrealistic things that let you feel the rotation of the car more, or the grip of the front tires, or more feeling through the braking, stuff that then allows you to just drive from the force feedback. I'm not sure if that actually has to come from the simulators. I think what it might have to come from is from force feedback wheel manufacturers, because already you have the telemetry data coming out of the driving simulators, and you do have wheels like the AccuForce wheel, for example, direct drive wheel, which allows you to use that telemetry to then create your own force feedback profiles. But it's only the AccuForce wheel that does that. So it'd be nice if all the force feedback wheels on the market allowed you to create your own force feedback from the telemetry. So the developer can focus on doing whatever they want to do and as literal as they want, because they'll want to go off the data they've got. I mean, what else are they going to design from? They can do that, and then players that want to fiddle around with force feedback or have custom settings or want to capture the G-force kind of feel of driving a car, well, then they'll be able to do that using their force feedback wheel software. So I think hopefully that'll be the future, is more wheels having the ability for the end user to generate force feedback from the telemetry.
It sounds definitely interesting. How is it then, like in your opinion, let's say we all agree on one title that we like in terms of force feedback, that's the best. How much of this is the hardware then? Would we all still agree even if you're using like a super entry level wheel and someone else is using a direct drive wheel? Or just how much is the impact on hardware when it comes to the force feedback and how good it is?
Yeah, so this is another really difficult aspect of force feedback, especially from the developer's perspective. I mean, like we were saying earlier, the awkward thing from a developer is they're going to be very tight on deadlines and budget for all the basic stuff of a simulator, and the force feedback's a whole nother ball game that they probably don't have that much time to really spend working on. But yeah, then you have all the people with different force feedback wheels, like stuff from a Logitech G25 or a G293 now, all the way up to Fanatec Podium or Simucubes and what have you. And fundamentally, those lower end wheels respond differently to what the game is putting out. Whereas the higher end wheels, they will feel whatever the game's putting out. So the developer really, if they wanted to get the most out of the equipment, they would have to design force feedback for the low end wheels that works well with those low end wheels. And then also have force feedback that works with the high end wheels. So it all gets very, very messy and very, very complicated for the developers. But yeah, the force feedback wheel that you use definitely makes a huge difference for force feedback until you get to direct drive wheels, where I think you can feel exactly what the game's putting out. But yes, if you're playing a driving simulator with a Logitech G293, the exact same game will feel different with that wheel as it will on a T300, as it will on a CSL Elite or even maybe a DD Pro.
Yep.
Until you get to those DD wheels, then all the DD wheels are pretty similar in terms of you being able to feel exactly what
And then we could also go into another 3 hours of talking about the settings of the actual wheelbase, right? Or the steering wheel you use on them.
The wheel size. Oh my God.
Definitely a lot of factors. Which is why I love this talk about force feedback, right? Because we always tone it down, especially in, like community groups where we all chat or Discords, right? Where it's like, oh, this force feedback is good, that force feedback is bad, right? It's like, yeah, but there's so many factors that we normally don't share with each other regarding like, oh, I actually tried this on that setting with that wheelbase. So I think it will be problematic to one day actually all agree on one sim to be the best. But since I didn't put you in that place yet, give me a ranking. In terms of force feedback.
Hang on a minute, this is a good video idea, guys. Next on the Game of Muscle YouTube channel, this is after when we get back to the Game of Muscle lab, top 10 force feedback sims. Okay, I'll do it here. We're listing them off the top of my head in order. What are we ordering by? Raw realism or actually
the Game of Muscle list, so whatever you feel.
Game of Muscle, too much T, subjective view of force feedback. Okay. Yeah. So at the top, obviously the original Assetto Corsa. The original Assetto Corsa at the top for number 1. Should have probably said that last to build up tension there.
You're not a good content creator, are you?
What's going on? Okay, so
cut that out.
the best at the top, Assetto Corsa. Hang on, I can really upset people here. No, I won't show them.
All right.
City car driver, number 1. OMSI bus simulator, number 2.
No, we don't go.
Okay, so the best force feedback, Assetto Corsa.
Assetto Corsa, all right.
Well, the second place is really difficult because R-Factor 2, there's some cars in that are amazing, and so you can feel so much like tyre flex, subtle detail, suspension. It can be really raw, if not over the top at times in terms of how much you can feel. So, and then you've got like Race Room, which has a really nice feel for loading, and there's the weighting of it.
The weight transition is great on it.
Especially if you've got a high-end wheel. On a low-end wheel, not so much, I don't think. So, top Assetto Corsa. Second, R-Factor 2 with good cars in R-Factor 2. Third, Race Room. Wow, see, then you've got like Automobilista, which, and some of this, like especially mod cars for R-Factor 1 that Niels Husinveld did. He was amazing with early getting the force feedback working decent in the olden days. So yeah, the convoluted list: AC, R-Factor 2, Race Room. Then I'm putting iRacing. Some aspects of iRacing are awesome.
I was expecting AMS now. Okay.
Okay. We'll put AMS 1 there. Some aspects of iRacing are fantastic. So, like the road texture feel and suspension can be really nice in iRacing, and IFFB is really nice for that rotation. So that probably gets around sort of at 5th position. Yeah, and then we move on down. I'm not sure. Then you got AMS 2 where you can do custom force feedback with it, and it can be quite good.
Yeah, with the right fiddling, it feels amazing.
Yeah, and then you can play any sim with an AccuForce wheel, and then you've got your own settings you could do with that anyway. So that changes the list again. I'll just forget them all. Just put Assetto Corsa. That's it.
I mean, I think the key factors for a community then is like you didn't even put ACC in the top 5. We expected that because you said that from the beginning.
Yeah.
But to me, interestingly, because like I said, I obviously work for a developer, so I know a bit about the engines and all that stuff. That you put 1, 2, 3 games in the top 5, 4 games in the top. No, 3 games in the top 5 that are P-motor, G-motor engines.
Yeah.
Because Race Room is based on R-Factor 1.
Yeah.
R Factor 2 is based on R Factor.
Yeah.
And AMS 1 is based on R Factor 2.
And AMS 2 still has some
But that's-
heritage there.
Yes,
going back.
I wonder how much, because
Yeah.
I think it feels good, and I think the guys at Razer did an amazing job at basically polishing and bringing the best out of the Madness engine.
Yeah.
But then we would need to go into details like, even if you have the physics, the engine actually needs to do it the right way. So the graphic engine has, as part of that physics engine, so it influences. So you couldn't just copy AMS1 force feedback over to a Madness engine game because it's a different engine. But we're not going that way. That might be another 3-hour show that we do one day where we discuss
Today, Nitro Nights runs out of electricity as a bold man talks everyone to death through force feedback.
He was, right? It's a fun segment, and I really appreciate your passion for it and your knowledge bring in.
Here should have been the blind force feedback test together with Gamer Muscle and Jonas. But unfortunately, Jonas got ill, and also Marvin was sick. And you can probably guess it, I also got ill. Therefore, we couldn't record this video as planned, and you have to instead listen to my voiceover saying sorry.
Now that we had the opinion already of Gamer Muscle, so the virtual side, and the opinion about force feedback, it's now time to talk to someone who knows both worlds, who did real racing and virtual racing on a very high level. So more than happy to welcome Moritz Loehner from Der Motorsport or Der Esports, depending on what you're doing at that moment, I would say. Moritz, you all right?
Hey, hello. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. It's a long time that I actually saw you on an event. And since then, you did a lot of real racing. You were part of the DTM trophy. How's that going so far?
Yeah, it's quite a lot of stuff happened since I think we last talked face-to-face. But it's going great. Like, esports is going incredibly good, like always pretty much. And then also last year, with my first real life season, straight into cold waters in my first DTM trophy race. It was like a lot of ups and downs. The biggest up right at the beginning of the season with my podium in my very first race. Then there was a lot of like a big learning curve to be had. And now I'm here. 2022, next season is coming up, and I hope to get everything going that I learned from last year and put it into practice this year.
I'm absolutely sure you will improve even more. You had very successful races already last season around, but to get you up to speed with what we said in Nitro Nights today is we had the discussion with James, the Gamer Muscle, about force feedback and which sim feels the best, and there we actually stumbled across the thing that there's realistic force feedback, which kind of gives you what a real car would translate to the steering wheel, and then there is the, let's say, sim racing force feedback that gives you a lot more input because you can't feel the chassis around you. What's your take on that? What are you looking for in a sim? Is it the real one, or the more information the better?
Now, it's difficult actually, because in a real car you don't actually feel the force feedback itself that much, because you have like the car moving around and all that stuff. So the force feedback the force feedback itself is like all of the car and not only the steering. You don't really feel the steering in the real car, only like when you go over real big bumps. So if you really want to have real steering in a simulator, you basically have almost no force feedback. So you gotta have some sort of bigger force feedback in the sim to actually feel what the car is doing. So I'm also a type of guy who probably runs a bit of higher force feedback in a sim to feel what my car is doing, while oversteering, understeering, over bumps, over curbs, and whatever. So of course you want to have it like realistic, that it's not too much, that you still be able to jump into the real car and then do well, because you just have the feeling of it. But you definitely need more force feedback in a sim to have a feeling for the car.
So basically, you definitely you prefer information over simulation in that case of force feedback. But what is it then? What makes the biggest difference for you when you jump from your simulator at home or the event you are into the real race car afterwards? Is there something that you need to get used to every single time because it's the main difference?
Actually, it's the other way around. From the simulator into the real car, there's no getting used to it at all. You basically have like that one feedback more, that it's the G-forces and the feeling of your butt, that you know how the car behaves. So that's a +1. But when you go back from real racing to the simulator again, that's where the real issue is, because you have all that feeling. You have like 3 days of driving, and everything is moving around you, and then you go back to the sim, and something is just missing there, and you need like 1 or 2 days, especially at the beginning. Like after my first few races, I really struggled to get used to in the simulator again, because I had to go back from the racing weekend and instantly prepare for my next big esports race. So I really struggled there for 2 days to get going again, to get feeling in the car. But I think with race after race, with switching between real life and sim racing more frequently, you get used to it kinda, and you get used to it faster. You go home and then you instantly know, okay, this is how it feels now, and you adjust to it.
At least that kind of supports my point, because I always getting blamed that I'm slow in sim racing, which is obviously true nowadays, right? But I always say the more real racing I do, the slower I get in the sim. So you kind of support my excuse here. I like that. That's really great. But when we talk about the sim side, you obviously have a lot of years of experience as well, right? Like I said, we met many moons before nowadays in sim racing. If I ask you for your top 5 in terms of force feedback, can you give me a list and maybe a few reasons as to why some of the titles are really good for you in terms of force feedback and what others are lacking?
Top 5? Are there even top 5 sims out there? I don't know.
Nowadays, there are more than 5 sims. I can tell you that.
Okay. It's actually difficult because every sim has like different physics aspects which they're good at. So also the force feedback needs to fit to those aspects. And I feel like where iRacing, for example, has like a force feedback where you get like really hard hits into the wheel, helps you though because the physics of the game support this. Where like Race Room has got new force feedbacks, I think a few months ago, and it's really smooth. You feel the bumps in a very smooth way, but it also supports the driving of Race Room because you don't need to feel the bumps that much because they don't matter that much on Race Room, or there are not that many bumps on the road on most of the tracks. So that really suits to the sim, and that's with most of the sims. I feel like a lot of the sims have their force feedback just like it suits the sim and the physics of the sim the most. And Race Room, for example, they only put the physics which are coming from the track onto the tires and whatever onto the force feedback. There's no artificial every force feedback is artificial in the sim, but they don't put any artificial force feedback into the wheel. Whereas iRacing, for example, does it a little bit more, I feel like. And also a big difference is frequency between the sims. I think iRacing is still running on 60 hertz, which you feel. This is the reason why you feel those heavy bumps while you steer. It's not a smooth way from transitioning from low force feedback to high force feedback. All the other sims have more frequency already, so it really depends. But I feel like Assetto Corsa Competizione was pretty much the first sim which had a really good force feedback, and all the other sims adapted to it months after. So I would say my top 3 are not in a particular order, but it's iRacing, Assetto Corsa Competizione, and Race Room.
All right, it's definitely a different list to Gamer Muscle, but that makes it interesting, right? It is a topic where it's hard for all of us to agree one day, I feel, as it also depends on the hardware you're using, right? We talked about that in today's episode as well. But good to hear. So iRacing and ACC are obviously completely different titles. Racing kind of fits. It's a title that you play the most, I would say, competitive-wise, right? Is that part of your choices? Would you rather compete in a sim title where you like the force feedback, or you're just looking for the next big competition you don't mind what it's on?
A bit of both, I think. The pure driving part, obviously, is what makes it fun. And if you don't feel anything through the wheel, and it's not fun because it has a bad force feedback, then obviously you're not that invested into the competition or the sim. But nowadays, every sim has a pretty good force feedback, so that's not the biggest point. So for me, it's really about if the competition has a high standard or whatever, and then I choose what to drive.
All right. Then there's nothing more for me to say than thanks for joining us, for taking the time. I obviously want to let you get back to practice because you're super busy and someone that really does great work. And I'm wishing you good luck for your squad, for the team in general, and obviously all your races coming this season.
Thank you. Hopefully we see each other soon again, face to face.
I'm absolutely sure. Take care, man. Now we're really done with the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and let us know which sim has the best force feedback in your opinion. Let's discuss in the comment section down below. Until next time, stay safe and buckle up. Thanks for watching today's episode. If you liked this one, why not check out our last one, where we talked about the probably biggest racing game released this year in the form of Gran Turismo 7. Or take a look at the newest Challenger pack in ACC with a Porsche Cup Car Special.